Welcome to the Childfree Mental Health panel. I'm Cody Hetzel.
And I am Lenora Fay.
And we'll be your moderators.
Mental health is paramount, and this panel will explore how our child-free choice affects our well-being and gives an opportunity to debunk myths about child-free individuals' experiences.
So let's meet the panelists. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Right. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Would take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. Ramiko, we'll start with you, or Dr. Thomas, however you'd like to be recognized, you let me know.
Ramiko is fine. Hi, my name is Ramiko Thomas, and I am an assistant professor of psychology. I'm also a licensed psychologist, and I'm proudly child-free by choice, and I'm from Missouri.
All right. And Margaret, will go down to you and work our way over.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't hear you for a second, but we're all fine
That's okay.
Panic. I am Margaret O'Connor. I am a counsellor and psychotherapist. I'm based in Ireland, County Limerick in Ireland, and partly child-free as well. Thank you.
All right. Silka.
Good morning, everyone. I am Silka Calderon. I am from the Bronx, New York. I currently work in administration, and I am also working on hours to become a licensed mental health counselor.
And Takia.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I am, I do so much. I'm the executive director. I'm the executive director and the co-founder of a new nonprofit called Black People Die by Suicide 2. And our goal is really to normalize the conversation about mental health, well, specifically suicide prevention within the Black community. I'm a mental health trainer as well, a peer support specialist, and I am child-free by choice, happily. I'm a suicide attempt survivor, and I live with bipolar disorder.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We moderators are still waking up. So tell us about your child-free journey. When did you decide how that experience has been for you? We'll start with Ramiko.
I have to be honest. I never wanted children. I was one of those, I'm an only child, and children just never really, I never really was around children. I never really thought about having children. I never really thought about family life having to be about children. I thought that you could expand your family with animals. I loved pets. I had tons of pets growing up. And so for me, children just was never in the forefront. And I was fortunate because I had parents that never really made me feel guilty for my decision or for my choice. And so for me, I was fortunate in which children just never was something that I saw myself having. I liked my career too much.
It doesn't sound like anyone else on this panel can relate to that based on reactions. Okay, Margaret, go ahead.
So for me, similar, just never in my awareness or in my plans. I suppose I grew up in a time in Ireland where teenage pregnancy was the worst thing that could happen. There was absolutely no risk of it happening to me because I wasn't cool enough, but at that time. But it was definitely something to be avoided, and that was fine because it really just was not on my radar at all. But for me, I think then there was a switch. I suppose it was an abstract thing because it wasn't going to happen anyway. But then, and it wasn't something that bothered me. But then I guess I think you can move sometimes from it being like a passive abstract choice to it being okay, I actually have to make a decision here. So that came up kind of in a relationship I was in later on. So yeah, moved into much more of a, no, this is an active choice and this is something I kind of, am I committing to it or not now at this stage? And obviously decided that I would. But yeah, so I think there was those two stages in it for me, with a sense that I was probably the only one, or felt at the time, the only one in Ireland trying to consider that choice. There's certainly a lack of awareness or resources available. There would have been resources, but in America or in Europe. So thankfully that has changed, but it definitely had a feeling of isolation at the time. Not anymore, thankfully.
Thank you, Margaret. Silka, go ahead.
For me, I would say I basically went through the entire scale of every decision that you could basically go through. As a child, I actually did think that I would have children. It was just this thought, like that's just what you're supposed to do. I am Latina. In our culture, you just have children. That's just what it is. And I just thought that I would do the same. It wasn't until my 20s and early 30s that I started kind of saying, well, I don't really think that this is something that I want. But I was still fence sitting, it was just sort of ingrained in my culture. And I sort of went back and forth about that. But once I got to my mid 30s, I just realized this is just not the direction that I should be going in. I really started standing firm on that. And now I'm child free by choice, and I actively speak about it, and I feel very comfortable in my decision.
Excellent. Tahia, go ahead.
So I don't remember honestly when I made the decision. I do remember saying it around high school. So I'm the oldest of 7 children. So I changed my first diaper at 9. In high school, I worked at a daycare, and I also took child development. And that's when I quickly learned, like, okay, children are so much more than just dressing them up in cute clothing. And I remember telling my grandmother often tells me that, like, you've been saying it since high school, you didn't want children. But I thought, like, since I'm a woman, that's something I'm like supposed to do. And it wasn't until I met 2 of my mentors actually, and they're about 10 years older than me. I'm in my 30s now, but in my 20s, they were telling me, like, you don't have to do anything because of your gender. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I don't have to do this because that's what society says I'm supposed to do. And I think in my early 20s is like when I made that actual decision, like, I maybe made a conscious decision because my grandma was like, you've been saying that forever. And so I've been, standing firm on that since then. And the biggest thing for me is often seeing the mental toll that that children can have on parents. That's not to say that children don't bring joy to the world, but even outside of that, the other side is terms of the stress, physical, mental, sometimes financial stress. And I know with my mental health is extremely fragile. Yes, I'm doing well from my suicide attempt in 2016, but overall, bipolar disorder is something I'll have to fight for the rest of my life. And I don't think, I don't want to roll the dice. Like, let's see, I think we all kind of say in the child free by choice community, I would rather regret not having them than to regret having them. I mean, my mind has never changed for over 10 years. So I highly doubt that that's going to happen. And with being the oldest of 7 children, I'm bound to have nieces and nephews. I have tons of little cousins that I get. I'm known as the fun godmom, the fun auntie, and all of that. So it's like, I'm okay within that role. I'm aware that I don't have to have my own children to leave an impact, on the next generation, or people talk about leaving a legacy, but I think for me, I quickly learned that my mental health is so important to me that having children, it would just be too much for me to handle. Just taking care of myself alone sometimes is a lot. And I would just rather take care of myself and possibly a pet.
Well, and you brought up a good point back in your 20s, and you had kind of those mentors that were speaking with you and letting you know that, yeah, you don't have to make that decision to be a parent. You can not have kids too. And so that's just a soapbox, I guess, to all the people out there that wonder why we have this convention or why people get into social media and have these conversations and ask, well, why are you doing this? Because there are people that do need to hear that there's another side of things. It's not just a one path to live your life by. But anyway, I'll get off of that. So what led you into the mental health profession or to work with the mental health space? So, Micah, we'll begin with you.
I think for me, it's so interesting. It was actually taboo within my family to enter mental health because my family did not talk about emotions. They didn't talk about mental health. People that struggled with mental health, my grandmother used to call them touched. That was the term back in the day. And so it was a little taboo. But for me, I always was interested in understanding and learning more about people, to be honest with you. My father was into criminology, and so he would have all these stories. And I was always wondering, well, how did that person get to do what they're doing? How did they get to where they're at? You know, how do they cope with how they're feeling? All of that stuff. And so I didn't even understand what psychology was until I went to community college and I had my first professor in psychology. She taught an abnormal psych class. And I was listening to that. I was like, wait a minute, that's actually a field that you can go into. I could talk to people. I can listen to people. I can help people with their challenges. Also, I had my own struggles with mental health, and my family, I'd seen some of their struggles with mental health. But again, I didn't know what it was really called. I didn't understand what it was really about until I started within school and started learning more about disorders, learning more about the stigma about mental health. My mother is a nurse. And so she understood the physical pieces, but there was a lot of times when we would talk and I was like, yeah, but there's some mental stuff that's going on too that's not being addressed as well. And so what can we do within our community? Also, being African American, that was something that was never talked about within my community when it came to mental health and a lot of the stigma. And so for me, that was something that I wanted to give back and understand more for that. So that's how I got into it. And I absolutely loved it. I became a psychologist to learn to do private practice and to help people. But then I took a step back and was like, well, I'd like to teach because I'm learning that there's more people that are interested in the field, especially the younger generations, the Gen Zer and the younger millennials. They're more apt to talk about mental health. And so that's what my journey became.
Thank you for sharing that. Margaret, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, similar. I think I always was drawn to working with people. It took me quite a while to figure out what role I could do that in. So I did kind of a general degree after college and worked in lots of different, I suppose, people-related jobs, including a creche for a year. But worked with older people and like healthcare assistant, nursing home care, and then kind of moved into community development and actually did quite a lot of family support work. And it was through a job there that I got a chance to do an introduction to counselling course, which really just cemented that this was the area. So I really like the one-to-one interaction. I would work with groups as well, but the one-to-one piece is it for me, that you're really able to give and hold that space for people. I think that's, part of the power of counselling psychotherapy is that it is a time and a space specifically for that person. And so often we don't have that time, or people can't get that time in their own lives. So that's, I think, what has drawn me to this particular aspect of counselling psychotherapy with clients.
All right. Silka.
Well, I cheated because I grew up in a home where I did have access to mental health resources. My mother is a licensed clinical social worker. She's been for over 30 years. I think, if I remember correctly, she went back to school when I was about 8. So I got the door to that very early. But I will admit, when I got into my 20s, I kind of didn't want to go in that direction. I was like, no, I don't want to follow that path. I want to do my own thing. So, I got my business degree and I wanted to see, what was out there. But then when I, went to take like elective courses, I was taking like psychology classes, anthropology classes, and doing all that. And there's that part of you inside of you that kind of sometimes starts poking at you like, hey, maybe this is not what you should be doing. Maybe you should be going here or there. And it just kind of kept coming up. And I was having a lot of conversations with friends and family and stuff like that. And it just continued coming to the front. It just continued coming to the front. And I said, okay, you know what, I'm just not going to ignore it. And when I decided to go get my master's degree, I decided to go get my degree in that, in mental health counseling. And, it's interesting because now I actually do some work with my mom in her private practice. And it's just, I don't know, it's like the best thing ever because I get to learn, I get to do stuff with my mom. And just see a lot of different elements in that space. So I'm actually really excited about it. My husband is also studying in the field, so we'll at some point be working together. So we're keeping it all in the family. And, I actually was in therapy myself when I was starting at 14. I advocate for it very heavily. And, I have tons of conversation with my family about it. So I feel very lucky that I was able to have that doorway in and that outlet at a very young age. And so I would like, to do the same thing myself as I, progress in my career.
All right. Thank you for sharing. And Takia.
So getting into mental health was not something that I planned on doing. So prior to working into the mental health space, my background is communications and media. So I worked for television networks, and I did a lot of like award shows, event planning, publicity. That was it. And it wasn't until my early to mid 20s, right after graduate school, when I had my suicide attempt, I started like writing articles for different platforms. And I started noticing how writing was actually very therapeutic for me. After I was released from the hospital, I was continuing with my therapist. And from there, I actually started like under an alias name because I didn't want people to know it was me because of like stigma, because it wasn't really talked about. And so people started commenting saying like, I can relate to that, you're not alone. And then I kind of had like a coming out, if you will. And I was just like, you know what, I'm going to own this is who I am. And from there, it transpired into like speaking, a podcast, writing a book. It was just kind of like little blocks along the way. And then I ended up I'm in the DC area, but specifically I live in Maryland. And I started pursuing peer certification through the Maryland Behavioral Health and Addiction Certification Board. And peer support specialists are individuals with lived experience, and we used our lived experience to assist others in their recovery. So I don't do clinical work, but I have helped individuals develop wellness plans. I led peer support groups, whether that was working with the National Alliance on Mental Illness or other behavioral health organizations. And I find that has been very supportive because it's very similar to like a sponsor or a coach, if you will. So we're not giving advice or any clinical treatment, but it is a safe space for people to talk about their mental health challenges, or for some people, it may be with addiction struggles, where you can identify like, okay, well, I'm not alone, and other people actually go through this as well. And so that actually helped me. And then from there, I became certified as a mental health first aid instructor. I became certified as a youth mental health first aid instructor, as well as a certification in wellness recovery action plan. So I started pursuing a whole bunch of mental health certifications to get really educated, just so that I could also take the test to become certified within my state to offer peer support. And so that's kind of like how I transitioned into the space. And now I'm currently actually, my focus, I really like to focus on suicide prevention within the Black community, because I feel like mental health is still stigmatized, but more people in my community, and I think just in general overall, are starting to talk about mental health, but suicide still seems to be very taboo. And so for me, I'm actually in the process of researching PhD programs so I can focus specifically on suicide prevention within the Black community. And that's kind of my journey, how I got into the mental health space.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. And who knows, maybe you help someone just now decide what field of work they want to go into. I don't know. You might have just recruited somebody into the field. So thank you for that.
So is there a difference in how mental health is approached if the person has a child or not? So the person working on their own mental health, is there a different strategy that you've maybe noticed? Ramika, we'll start with you.
You know, it's interesting when a person is kind of working on themselves, whether they have a child or not. Well, let me go back. If a person is working on themselves, that I've seen with my clients that have children, sometimes they want to make sure they break that trauma or intergenerational trauma. They also sometimes want to make sure that they're emotionally regulated so that they can help their child when it comes to emotional regulation as well. When it comes to people that are child free by choice that I've seen in me myself, that I've worked on myself, it's been mostly about boundaries, meaning that boundaries of, wait a minute, just because I don't have children does not mean that I could take this extra shift at work. Or just because I do not have children does not mean I need to do all of these things. I do have a right to say no, or I'm solidified in my choice. So, really respect my decision and don't make me feel like I'm going to have FOMO, regret later, And so there's an assumption, I think, when it comes to that, people that choose to not have children, that they have all this free time. Another thing that I've noticed when it comes to child-free communities is there's this assumption that we have all this money and that we have all these finances and that
when are the checks rolling out? When am I getting my check?
Right. And social media helps with that. I have to admit, me myself, I'm child free by choice, but sometimes I'm like, man, I really should be doing more with my life. I should be going to Greece. And I was like, I can't afford that. So there's an expectation that child free by choice, we have all this time, all this money, all this resources. And imagine how that feels when somebody is really trying to just be who they are and without all of these assumptions. So those are the things that I've noticed within counseling individuals and even in myself, the differences with children, not with children.
Thank you for that. Cody, we talked about the child-free check last year. Please don't bring that up. And I know Dr. Jade, Child Free Wealth, is in the audience right now. Can you remind Cody of that conversation? Actually, I can't. No, actually, it was him that brought it up last year. I'll fight with these two later. All right, Margaret, go ahead, please.
That's a panel of its own. This question really made me think, and maybe I interpreted it in a different way, but I was thinking, well, there shouldn't be a difference in how people are approached, whether they have children or not. And I suppose I'm thinking for my own particular approach would be very humanistic and client-centered in that everybody is an individual. Just like I might work with 10 parents, but all their experience could be completely different, or 10 child-free people. So I suppose I was thinking, well, I shouldn't be assuming that it's a problem. Like if somebody comes to me and they tell me 3 things about themselves, I'm not going to pick out, oh, well, that's why they're in therapy. Like that's why they're here. That's not as a therapist who's supposed to be, objective and non-judgmental and really trying to move into the frame of reference of the client. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant by the question, but that's the way I went to it. So I would hope that people would be treated differently, but absolutely taking into consideration that they could be impacted by different issues like was just mentioned. So.
Thank you, Margaret. Silka, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Margaret, and I actually did reach out for clarification on the question before the convention, because I also agree that the answer is no. The approach should not be different, but I do think that it is important that when you have that initial meeting with the person, that is a question to ask, and then the question is presented. Is that something that you want to explore? Is that something that you want to talk about within the realm of what it is that you're trying to focus on during your therapy? And, even talking about it, like, let's say you're, meeting with a child, allowing that to even be available for conversation, because most people just don't even know that the conversation is available to be had. Mm-hmm. I have a niece who has come and asked me questions about having babies, and that she may not, she's only 10 years old. And I never shy away from having the discussion with her. So a lot of times when that person is coming in, the approach is pretty much the same as anybody, in my opinion, is that when they come in, like I am of the same mind of Margaret. It's very humanistic. It's very like, okay, what is it that you would like to get out of your, out of this relationship that we have, this therapeutic relationship? What is it that you would like for yourself, and how can we get you where you need to be, right? And if that is a piece of it, with regards to the work about them being child-free and maybe what struggles they may or may not be having with that, we can explore that. But the approach would not change in any way for me.
Thank you, Silka. Takia, go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to come from the opposite end, the client. So I've been working with my therapist. I think, I do agree the answer is no, it shouldn't be approached differently. So I remember talking to my therapist. September will be 8 years that I've been working with her, and I love my therapist. And I remember telling her when I first started going, like, I don't think children are in the cards for me. And I like kind of gave her all these reasons. And one of the questions she asked me, she's like, do you feel the need to justify your response to people? And I kind of set back with that. And I think because so many people would ask me the dread question, like, who's going to take care of you when you're older? That's another panel. But which would be like, what, you know? And so for me, that would actually really make me upset. And I'm like, I'm like, I haven't really thought that far ahead. But for me, I'm like, I don't think having children just because I want somebody to take care of me is not a good enough reason for me. I can't speak for other people. And then I remember kind of writing my list out and after therapy. And when I wrote this list out, I had like 10 reasons for why I didn't want them, and I had 0 reasons for why I wanted them. And so my therapist was like, well, I think you have your answer. I don't, if you literally have 0 reasons why. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I have to make this decision that's best for myself and not for what other people think that I should do. I'm very grateful that like my mom and my grandmother, most people in my life are actually very supportive. And I also happen to have child-free mentors as well as also child-free friends. Not that I sought them out, it kind of happened. And so I think for me, therapy has been vital in helping me to like stand firm on my decision and not back down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Michael kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but are any of you aware of specific issues like affecting the child-free community in regards to mental health? Michael, we'll go to you if you wanted to expound on anything you might have mentioned earlier.
So one of the things I was just thinking about is, like I said, with boundaries, recognizing that piece too. Self-care, that's a big one that on both, whether it's the person that's having children or has children or not. Also, there can be an expectation when it comes to child-free, like I said, going back to those boundaries, that we have all this time, all this energy, and we're not just allowed to just be, but also on the opposite end, there's this expectation that having children leads to a happy retirement or that will be taken care of. And I've noticed that I've worked with people that do have children, and as they've aged, they're like, I wouldn't have my children take care of me at all. That's scary. Or I've worked in geriatric units or nursing homes in which expanded family or children did not come visit family members or did not, come talk to their family members. So there's not, I think that one of the things that we kind of miss is thinking that if we have children, we'll be solidified, everything will be fine. And that's not the case. Also, people don't think about their energy levels as well and really thinking about what's the reason that you want to have children. So for example, with me, one of the things is that my career was forefront, and I knew being a mental health therapist, I would not have the energy or the time or even the wherewithal to take care of someone else. And so the thing that really gets me when I hear some of the stigmas when it comes to child-free communities is that there's selfishness involved. But that's not being selfish if you're really taking time out and recognizing I cannot take care of someone else. I need to take care of myself first to be there for other people within that. So for me, I find that those are some things that I noticed within child-free communities and people with children that we talk about within sessions too.
Yeah, good points. Margaret, anything to add to that?
Yes, all of that. Generally, other people, not to be flippant, but other people can be a big source of stress. There's a difference in, for people who genuinely aren't sure and are upset about that in themselves. But for people who are quite happy with their choice, like people like most of us, it's then negotiating that with other people that can be a source of stress. But something as well that comes up a lot for me with my clients is that lack of, like, what is my path? So the path to being a parent or being a parent, what that looks like is really clear. We see it all the time in every film and ad and photograph. But like, if I'm not doing that, what does life look like? What are my paths? What are my achievements? Where are my milestones? And the celebrations of those milestones. And it can really compound the isolation or the the difficulty of, well, yes, what is important? If children are not going to be a direct part of my life, what do I do? You know, how do I decide what's important to me? And again, other people's opinions on that. So there's a lot to unpack and figure out for yourself, but then also that piece of kind of negotiating with other people and the stigma and even just misunderstanding at times can be very, very difficult for people.
Yeah. Silke, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's everything that everyone said, and also that so some of the stuff that I have noticed that I think is very important to be mindful of is, yes, the aspect of space, of personal space, and also that if somebody wants to share their personal space as being child free, that we respect that. I think that's super important, and I think that we need to focus a lot more on just it being part of the regular conversation, the same way that it would be if someone was talking about, having children. The other thing is the cultural dynamics that come with being child free, and those people that are seeking out therapy. There are a lot of people that come from certain cultural dynamics where that's just not something that is done, that is not something that's spoken about, and those people are looking for places to speak, to be heard, to find assistance and resources. It is something that is present, that does need to be looked at. And the other thing that I was thinking too was just this idea of, just not feeling ashamed that you want to get therapy, right? Because I tell people all the time, being child free doesn't exclude you from going through the things that anybody else goes through. There are child free people who are fine. There are child free people who have anxiety. There are child free people who have depression. There are people that came from good lives, bad lives, all different types. Being child free does not change who we are as people, right? We're still your sisters. We're still your friends. We're still your cousin. We're still your children. We're still all these same people. And we still go through all the same stuff that everyday people go through. It is the only difference is we do not also have to incorporate a child with all those things that we're going through. And so when we're dealing with all those things and we're going out to seek, some type of professional help, it's not going to be any different than anybody else who does it. And that's important to look at, because a lot of people are like, oh, you don't have children, you don't have to worry about anything, you're good. That is 100% not true. We all deal with the same stuff that everybody else deals with: work stress, financial stress, anything that you can think of that anybody else is dealing with. We as child-free people are dealing with it also. And it's important to make that distinction, and for people to see that, so that if you are saying like, yeah, I'm talking to a therapist, and people are like, oh, but you don't have any kids, so you don't have stress. That is incorrect. And while I'm not going to share with you my personal reasons why I want to go to therapy, I don't have any problem hiding it and advocating for that, because it's very important to do so, and not, feel ashamed or making someone feel ashamed because they want to, seek services in whatever way they want to.
Yeah, great points. Takia, what would you like to add?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about when it comes to people who decide to be, child free, a lot of the misconceptions, I feel like, well, I'm not going to say it's a misconception, like that we're so like mean and like nasty. I know it's a broad spectrum, because I've seen some very mean things by child free people. But that's not all of us. I think people have to realize, like, we're all different types of, ages, races, ethnicities, socioeconomic status, people with mental health challenges, people without, but they would think that like, oh, they're just, so mean, not realizing that one person is not the entire child-free community. It's a spectrum of us. And another thing, sometimes people will think like, oh, they're just bragging about their child-free life. And it's like, some people may be bragging, but I don't take it as that. I think people are just letting other people know that you have the right to make the choice for you. So many times people think this is something that they're supposed to do. And so I like seeing child-free videos, because for me, it's like, wow, these are the things that like even people that are younger, people that are younger, or people who are undecided, to realize you don't have to make this choice. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I love the conference, is because it's like you're letting people know you have options and you don't have to do something. And or the other thing, sometimes people say like, oh, you'll be lonely, when you get older if you don't have children. And I feel like those are a lot of the things that people often kind of think like, oh, and then because you're lonely, maybe you'll have all these mental health challenges when you get older. And I sometimes feel like people who have children, they box child-free people together as if we all have one type of personality, and we're all the same, and that's simply not. It's a spectrum, and I feel like that's often what I usually hear and see.
Yeah, a lot of times it seems like they're almost projecting their insecurities and fears onto us. It's like, well, aren't you afraid of this? It's like, no, I've made a well thought out decision to not have kids, and that means I'm planning the next steps of my life as well. So yeah, I think we've got some great audience questions to bring up whenever. Here we go. So we've got a question for the panelists. Do you think having anxiety or being an introvert in particular affects one's decision to have children, and why? Who wants to take this one? We can go out of order. It doesn't matter. Just raise your hand. Anybody? Nobody. Oh, you still in the audience.
I can.
Okay. Go for it.
I would say, I wouldn't know if I'd use the word affects, but I would say that I do think that it may play a role in that person's conscious decision to be child free. I know, people who are child free who have literally said to me, I do not want to pass this down. I do not want to put a child through this. I want to end it here with me. And that's not a slight to anyone, but there are people who are consciously aware of what mental things go on through the family generationally, what can and cannot be passed down, and they speak to that, and they say, you know what, also there are people who talk about, like, if I bring a child into this world, it is unfair for that child to have to deal with the things that I go through, right? I do not want to project my things onto a child, and although I can seek help and I can do a lot of stuff, why should a child have to deal with that part of me? And so that is one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but it is part of the reason that I am child free. So I'd rather not and take care of myself. Whereas, you have other people who may have all those things and continue to have children anyway, and are not addressing all those things that are coming into the realm. Or maybe they're ignoring it, and saying, no, I'm supposed to have children anyway, even though I'm anxious or depressed, I'm supposed to have children. And they it continues on, and then possibly spreads through the next generation. So, I think that's something that, people can consciously look at and say, you know what, I'd rather focus here, take care of what I need to take care of, and not bring children into the world and further kind of spread that out in the space.
And that's a nice segue to plug our Child Free and Disabilities panel that'll be coming up later.
And also, I was thinking there are also people that will have children that I've seen, because that's a really good point, that'll have children because they want a best friend, or they want a child to calm that trauma and that anxiety. And really never stop to think about what's best for the child, and really to quench their anxiety or to do better. I'll have children so that I don't, I know how my mother and my father treated me, so I want to make sure that I don't make that same mistake, to kind of have a proof. And again, that's still not about the child. That's still about a person's own undisclosed needs that are still getting transferred through or projected onto the child. So I get concerned about the opposite too, of, if somebody's dealing with anxiety, introversion, are they choosing to have children to quench that fear?
That's a great point. Yeah, when you see people, they'll literally say, why do you have, I wanted to have a mini me. I wanted to have my best friend. It's like, well, there's 8 billion of us now. Like, there's somebody out there that'll be your best friend, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, would anyone else like to answer that before we move on to the next question?
I wanted to add something. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, Takia, go ahead.
So it made me think about, I remember when I went to, I would say that, like, for me, it wasn't the only reason, but it was the main reason. And I went to see my OBGYN, and she's like, you're gonna have, gonna have children because I'm talking about birth control options. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna have. She's like, oh, tons of women say. I'm like, I'm telling you, I'm not. And I said, you know what? What my reason is, I said, you don't even know this because this is a new provider that I was seeing. I said, you don't know that I'm a suicide attempt survivor. You don't know that I have bipolar disorder. I said, so my main reason is because of my own mental health. And it stopped her in her tracks. And she said, wow, she said, you're the first patient that I've talked to, however many years she's been practicing, that actually brought up mental health before conceiving. So I was like, you guys are so busy trying to push children onto other people without realizing some people are not even mentally equipped to handle themselves, let alone children. And that for me was when I had that, when I was in that, at that appointment, I realized, one, I made the right decision, and two, how paramount it is to take care of one's own mental health before even considering children.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that learning opportunity with that doctor or provider. Yeah, Margaret.
Yeah, just quickly, and it's about knowing yourself. So if you're an introvert or an extrovert or somewhere on that continuum, it's about knowing what works for you. So I am definitely an introvert, so I'll talk to you all today, and then I'll go and have some quiet time. Or again tomorrow, and I'll have some other quiet time. And I had to learn that there's nothing wrong with me. I talk to people. I'm very sociable, and I have friends, and everything's fine. But I'm not going to go and meet. I'm not like 2 or 3 days in a row of socializing, and I will need a week in a darkened room, and that's fine. And now I know that, and I plan accordingly. So it's about knowing what works for you. And it's not saying that people who are introverted can't be parents, but it's saying, like, it's about knowing yourself, what works for you and what doesn't, and not forcing yourself to do something that doesn't work for you. And I think there is some research, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there was some research a few years ago that did show that there was kind of a correlation, I won't say causation, but correlation between being child-free and being more aware of your introversion and what you need then as a result of that.
Yeah.
Margaret, that is so me. After Childfree Convention is over, I go into a dark corner for like a month because it's like, okay, I am an introvert as well too. So it's like, okay, I know it's hard to believe, but I get it. It's important.
I'm not an introvert.
But you know what? I would never know that about you. I mean, we talk all the time, but still, actually, I would have. Yeah, okay, that's funny. Anyway, we have another question. Please, I think it's from Chris. Yes. What would be good advice in regards to dealing with isolation and loneliness as a child-free person, especially when there are no groups available to join or no family or friends? And just to clarify, Chris, I cannot remember what country you're in, but he's not in North America. So this is also from a cultural perspective as well.
It's a great question.
Whoever wants to ask or answer.
Raise your hand.
Or just start talking. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll jump in again if no one's going.
You want to leave the question up there? Yeah, leave it up there.
Rebecca, do you want to put the question back up just so they can read it? Because it's a lot to think about. This one we just sprung on people. So
yeah.
Thank you.
I would say it's really important. I think this is one of the biggest things I would look at with clients. Like, if you feel like you're the only one, that's a horrible place to be, no matter what it is. So it adds to the stigma, it adds to, it's not okay or whatever, what might be happening. So I think it's a really, really important piece to find, I know it might sound cliche, but find your tribe, find your people, know that you're not the only one. And I suppose we're really lucky now that hopefully most people would have access, even if it's online. If it's not, in real life would be lovely, but at least knowing that there are people, like there's so many books and podcasts, and again, the convention, that there are people out there, and it might, it mightn't be directly accessible to you, but I think it's really, really important to find some form of community for yourself. So it might mean going a little bit further afield, but I think it's really important to do that in some way, to know that you're not alone, and to try and balance out some of that isolation and stigma. It's very, very important.
So Chris is in the Middle East. Just an update on his location.
I mean, I would say reach out, right? Reach out, reach out of your city, literally. I live in New York. It's probably one, if not the most populated city in here in this country. And I have more child-free friends outside of New York than I do in New York. It happens, you know, and a lot of that was because I went online, I started looking for places, and I just started reading. And then, you know, some of us need to kind of pull out the card and be brave and start talking to other people. And sometimes a simple question will get you very far, and you start establishing, you know, that open communication with another person. And then, you know, you never know where that can take you. And from there, you can open that up, and it kind of creates a web where you start connecting to other people in other countries. And you know what? Even that sometimes turns into, well, I've been talking to this person for some time, I'm going to take a trip. And you meet someone, and you know, you could develop a nice friendship with them, and then you start extending out to that. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself to where you are. Yeah, it's nice to find you know, groups within the places where you live, but you know what, sometimes you find the best people outside of from where you are. So venture out, look. It also helps to get different opinions, different conversations, different experiences. So reach out outside from where you are. That would be the advice that I'd give.
And that's what I was thinking too, is that starting here with the Childfree Convention, you know, following some of our social media accounts within that. I'm in the Midwest, and it's very family oriented. So I had to reach out, just as a lot of the panelists were saying, outside of the Midwest. Social media became my friend when it came to that, but not even so much social media, is that I started looking within. So really taking time out for myself, you know, and really recognizing when I did that, I noticed that there were things that I like to do that really had nothing to do with being child free. It was just like, I noticed I love to take pottery. And so I joined a meetup group that had a pottery class, or so things that just didn't surround being child free, but just surrounded, you know, me and my interests in general was really helpful. And I met people throughout that. But social media and this convention, that's where I got my start when it comes to child free, because I would meet people that had children, but I'd never met people that were child free and that were really happy about it and talked about it and was open about it. That was a difference that I hadn't had before this convention. And so I really, really want to echo what people are saying, is to step out of comfort zone and to look at social media in this convention too.
I mean, honestly, like, you can start your own convention if you really want to. We meet lots of child-free people, so just start your own. It only takes 11 months out of the year, people. It's no problem whatsoever.
Well, and it's one of those topics as well that come up. It's like, well, why are you talking about this child-free stuff so much, whatever? Because it's not as easy for us to find child-free people. They're not all walking around with t-shirts on or whatever. Like, I can't go to the grocery store and be like, oh, that person is child-free. Like, there's no, like, if you've got a kid that's 3 to 5 or whatever, and they're in the aisle of the grocery store, and you've got a kid that age, it's probably pretty easy to say, oh, blah, blah, blah about kid stuff. We can't do that. We'll be escorted out of the grocery store. So that's why we need spaces like this. It's important. Yeah. But starting online, I guess, is good. It's unfortunate that people are in situations where they don't have like maybe physical contact of humans that are in the child-free space with them. But go virtual. I guess that's would be my advice. And the spaces are out there. They're out there. And unless they get blocked by all the algorithms, we're going to be found.
I think we have time for one more audience question before we wrap.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Please.
I'll go with this. Yeah. So do you think having anxiety or being an introvert in particular affects one?
We just did
that one already.
We did this one already.
Familiar. I was like, am I in the Twilight Zone?
Deja vu. This is only the panel number 3. I don't have time for deja vu yet. All right. Do we have okay. If not, we have several more questions, but we can skip to the last one, the final question, which is actually me. I'll do that. I think.
Go for it.
Okay. So final question. If someone is struggling with their choice to not have a kid, what are some first steps for them to that they can take to feel more secure in their decision? And that decision can be to have a child or to not have a child. It doesn't matter. Ramika, we'll start with you.
So one of the things that I was thinking about with this question is I'm a researcher by heart. So one of the things is I really researched child-free communities for myself. And I also, I have to be honest with you, even though I never really wanted children, I also found a community that said, I regret having children. And that was honestly a little bit more peaceful than I thought it would be, because it was people being honest about their decisions to have children within that. And something else that I asked myself when it comes to that is, what is the reason that if I wanted to have children or not, what is the reason I'm grappling with that? Is that fear of missing out? Also, something else that I think too is the reason that some people want to have children is, are they wanting a particular role in somebody's life? So for example, if you want to be a mentor, or, you know, so many people don't talk about volunteerism. I volunteer a lot. I volunteer when it comes to animals. I volunteer when it comes to Boys Girls Clubs. So you can volunteer. And also when it comes to your time to be around children, to be a role model when it comes to children. Also, if you have family members, or if your best friend has children. So there are different roles that you can take when it comes to if you're looking at what is the reason that you're wanting to have children. But I would really explore that question. What is the reason, and what is that about? Is there a fear of missing out, or is there a role that you want to have in someone's life to fulfill? And if that's the case, you don't necessarily have to have children to have that role. I've been very, very fortunate of being a godparent to one of my friends' children, or, you know, having, like I said, I love animals. And so being able to be inundated, even though they're like little fur children anyway, was really helpful for me. So that's where I would start with.
Okay, Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic advice, because I think we can, having or deciding to be a parent or have a child can represent a lot of other things. So it's really important to explore what that is. For me, I would always go back and start with values. You know, values, we live our lives according to our values. We're not always aware of what they are. We might only discover that when they clash, and that can happen here. So really, again, taking that time and space, trying to block out all the noise, and there's so much noise, and come back to yourself and what is important to you, what guides you, what helps you feel happy and content. When are you at your happiest? When are you at your least happy or most stressed? And what's going on there? You know, is it, if your values are adventure, and, you know, I can't think of any others now, but, you know, look at your values, look at your top 5 or top 10 values. Can you pick your top 3 and your top 1? And how do you live your life as much as possible in alignment with those values? Because that's when we'll be at our most content. So it takes time. That's not a one session exercise, but it's really, really important, because no matter whether we're aware of them or not, our values are influencing our decisions. So it's better to be as aware of them as you can, and then, as I said, try as much as possible to live in line with them. Yeah.
And also, to your point, if you enjoy talking about being child free, that might be a clue. Just throwing that out there. I mean, you know,
Red giveaway.
Yeah.
some of us just
absolutely.
love talking about this 24/7. Seriously. Silka, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's already been said, but I will also say, you know, I won't ever deter anybody from having conversations with their families and, you know, and friends. But I would say that you might not always get the conversation you want from family and friends, just for the obvious reasons. You know, most of the time I tell people, if you are in a place where you feel like you're struggling with somebody or something that you're trying to decide, go talk to somebody. And there are people who don't always right away feel comfortable going to a therapist. Some people are like, no, I'd rather talk to, you know, like a local counselor or like a life coach or whatnot. I will never deter somebody and say, don't do that. Maybe that's the first step to get you where you need to go. But I always encourage people, you know, there is nothing wrong with going to therapy. There is nothing wrong with having a conversation with a therapist, especially when we're in a place where we're trying to figure out what direction we're going in. And I think it's really great because you're going to someone who has a unbiased opinion. You want somebody who doesn't know everything or is not swaying from one way to another, where you can have open conversation with them about what are the things that you are, you know, going through, what you're feeling, what you may be struggling with or not, that can listen to you objectively and then possibly, you know, open that dialogue with you to maybe help you go in the direction to make a conscious decision about whether you do or don't want to have children. Because, you know, I try to remind people all the time, like, having children is a big deal. It's not like buying a dress or a pair of shoes. Like, it is a real important thing. And I think that a lot of times there isn't that sort of deep dive into thinking about what it entails to have children and bring them into the world. It's not like, oh, you just had them. No, they're here. They exist for a super long time. After you have them, they don't just like disappear. They're here for a long time. So I think people do need to take the time to think about that. And if that person is going through that, you know, they're swimming around thinking about whether they should or shouldn't, you know, talking to someone can always be super helpful. And having, like I said, that unbiased opinion, or even listening ears, active listening ears, to just hear out what are the things that you're feeling around that, and what made you come to those places in life where you are, you know, I hate to use the word struggling, but like, if you are struggling with the decision, then at least talk about how you got to that point, and how do we find a way to get us past that to the decision, which is, if you do want to have children, fine, but at least you are consciously making the decision because you've worked out whatever you needed to work out. And if you don't, then you don't. And you can't later say like, well, you know what, I didn't rush into any decision. I made a well thought out decision. Or maybe at the time I didn't want to have children and I waited 10 years and then I did have children 10 years later because I thought it was a better choice. It would help it would be more beneficial for you to do it that way than just, you know, not having a conversation and staying quiet, or making impulsive decisions based on fear or just pressure or anything like that. So, you know, that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you, Silka. Dakia, go ahead.
So I was like, wait, I had to jot some things down. So I think for starters, not everyone, I'm going to say some people, or maybe even a lot of people, don't even realize we're going to parenting until they actually become parents. And for a lot of child-free people, a lot of us has kind of really thought, I think, kind of like a deep dive. And so I would say, like, if someone is struggling, I'll kind of echo what the other panelists have said. Therapy has been vital for me and it has helped me. But if that's not a step you're comfortable with, maybe even writing a list out, why you would want them like I did, or why you wouldn't want them, and maybe comparing that. And then also, I think understanding what your values are, even writing those down. So for instance, and this is not to say that parents can't value these things. I have to put that disclaimer. For instance, I value my career over starting a family. I enjoy what I get to do. I love waking up every single morning, just like maybe for some parents, they love being parents and that works for them. And so for me, I love having a successful career, going out, speaking and doing all these things. And that is one of the things that finds me fulfillment. And so if it's feeling like, maybe being a parent will bring them for fulfillment, then maybe even exploring, okay, what need is not being met. And, if a particular need is not being met, then maybe even exploring why that need isn't even being met before making a conscious decision or even unconscious decision to have children. And I think that is kind of like where I would really start, is just kind of doing that deep dive, whether that's with a professional or simply journaling, because that has been vital and has really helped me a lot.
Right. And so with that, I think we'll enter into our closing remarks. If there is anyone that would like to provide information on how folks can reach you after the convention, projects you're working on, things that you might have in the hopper, let us know. And we'll start with Ramiko.
Hello. Okay. So if you would like to get in touch with me, my email is okimir@gmail.com. It's just Ramiko Backward. And I also have an IG account, Instagram, flower2977. And so, yes, you can reach me within that. I'm not the most active on social media, but I try my best. So definitely you can reach me within that.
All right. Thank you. And Margaret.
So my service is called Our Kids for Me. So that's website in terms for counseling, and also a link to my podcast, which has the same name, and it's the same name on Instagram and Facebook, and just my own name on Twitter. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Silke, how can they find you if you want to be found?
Yeah, I do want to be found. So I actually, I'm hoping to start next month. I will be actually starting a podcast next month from Childfree perspective. It is titled The Mentally Subscribed. There is an IG page going there. It's under Mentally Subscribed. So you can find me there. And I always tell people, like, the door is open. Anybody reach out. If conversation, resources, if you need to be pointed in the right direction, just holler. I will respond. I am around. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Takia.
So I'm pretty active on social media. Well, maybe Instagram for the most part. I do post on TikTok, but it's a lot. So I am it's in the chat, T_Kia Blackman on TikTok as well as Instagram. We have our podcast that's an extension of our nonprofit, which is called Black People Die by Suicide Too, and it's really to normalize that conversation about suicide within the Black community. Tomorrow we have our first event, which I'm super excited about, called Black and Suicidal. So we'll be really exploring the increase of suicide within the Black community, preventative measures, risk factors, and what we really could do, because currently Black people do have the highest rate of suicide. And so those are all the ways you can really kind of check in with me. Is either Instagram, TikTok, or just check out our podcast, which is available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. And if you're interested in checking out the event, tomorrow we are streaming it live on YouTube as well as our Facebook page, which is just Black People Die by Suicide Too.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your time, audience. Thank you for joining in with the questions and comments. We really appreciate that too. And so we are going to, go ahead.
I was going to say, we have the halftime show next. For the next hour, we have several segments plus some bathroom breaks, so don't leave just yet. We have incorporate that into the halftime show. And then we have the Lenora and Cody show, which you definitely don't want to miss in an hour and a half, or in another hour. Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.